Welcome in. Ready to dive into another chapter of Roman history.
Always ready to dig into the past.
Today we're focusing on Julius Caesar. Specifically, his often overlooked Germanic campaign. Happened back in 55 BCE.
Ah, yes. A campaign that truly reveals Caesar's strategic mind, and not just on the battlefield.
Right. It wasn't just about conquering Germania, it was a power play in the Roman political arena.
Exactly. This campaign was very calculated, very deliberate, but to fully grasp it, we need to rewind a bit to the Roman Senate.
Because they played a key role in all of this, right?
Absolutely. Think of the Senate as the powerhouse of the Roman Republic. They called the shots, especially when it came to war. Declared war, controlled the military budget, they held the purse strings, so to speak.
And Caesar, as a general, was bound by their decisions.
Precisely. He couldn't just decide to go to war on a whim. He needed the Senate's approval.
Okay, so let's get back to 55 BCE. Caesar is already knee-deep in the Gallic Wars, right? He's already proven himself against some tough opponents.
Right. The Helvetii, Ariovistus. Caesar had secured some significant victories in Gaul.
Victories that earned him quite a reputation back in Rome.
Exactly. He was seen as a hero, defending Roman interests against these barbarian threats. But those victories also revealed something else about Caesar.
That he wasn't afraid to be bold.
Exactly. He wasn't always content to wait for the Senate's permission slip. And that brings us to our main event, Caesar's decision to cross the Rhine.
Which was a huge ease deal. This wasn't just a minor border incursion, it was a statement.
Absolutely. And Roman law was crystal clear. Generals couldn't just initiate wars outside Roman territory without the Senate's go-ahead.
But Caesar argued that he had a good reason.
He claimed the Germanic tribes across the Rhine were a direct threat to Roman Gaul, required a preemptive strike. At least that was his justification.
But there's debate about how real this threat actually was. Some historians think Caesar might have exaggerated a bit.
It's true. It's one of those historical debates that still goes back and forth. Some scholars believe Caesar, maybe, used the perception of a Germanic threat to further his own ambitions.
So a calculated risk.
To put it mildly.
Yeah.
But Caesar wasn't content with just pushing back this supposed invasion. He took it a step further.
Cue the construction of the Rhine Bridge.
A remarkable feat of engineering, even today. In just 10 days, his legions built a bridge across a river that was, to the Romans, a pretty formidable natural barrier.
Talk about sending a message.
Oh, absolutely. To the Germanic tribes, it was a clear signal. We can reach you. Don't test us.
And back in Rome. What do you think the Senate thought?
I imagine there were mixed feelings. On the one hand, a successful Roman general expanding Roman influence. On the other hand, a Roman general acting without their explicit permission. A bit of a power struggle brewing, you see.
So Caesar's actions had everyone talking.
Absolutely. But even with this bold move, his goals in Germania were different from Gaul.
You're saying he wasn't interested in conquering all of Germania.
Right. Unlike his campaigns in Gaul, which were all about expanding Roman territory and control, this Germanic foray was more about a show of force, a quick, decisive strike. He focused on two tribes in particular, the Usipetes and the Tenteri.
And these tribes, they were spoiling for a fight with Caesar.
Not quite. They were actually in a vulnerable position, trying to find refuge from conflicts further east.
So why target them?
Caesar, ever the strategist, saw an opportunity. He recognized that these tribes, if they joined forces with others in the region, could pose a problem down the line.
Better to eliminate a potential threat before it grows?
Precisely. But the way he went about it, well, let's just say Caesar's methods in this swift subjugation were quite brutal, even for the standards of ancient warfare.
Brutal, you say? I mean, we are talking about ancient warfare here. Wasn't brutality just par for the course?
Well, yes and no. Even in ancient warfare, there were certain codes of conduct, certain expectations about honorable combat.
So you're saying Caesar threw those out the window?
Let's just say he had a very flexible interpretation of those codes.
Our sources describe some pretty unsettling scenes, like after Caesar defeated the Usipetes and Tenteri.
He ordered a mass slaughter of the defeated warriors.
Even those who tried to surrender.
Even those. It was a calculated move to instill fear, to crush any potential for future resistance. But it definitely ruffled some feathers back in Rome.
Because it went against those Roman ideals of honor and, not slaughtering, surrendering opponents.
Exactly. Even those who admired Caesar's military skills thought he'd gone a bit too far. It fueled the concerns about his disregard for tradition, for the Senate's authority.
It's like this pattern keeps repeating. Caesar's brilliance as a general, but also his willingness to play by his own rules. And nowhere is this more apparent than at the Battle of Alesia.
Hey there, time travelers. I wanted to take a couple of seconds to say hi. My name is Ronnie Perez, and I'm the creative director behind the 10-Minute Time Machine podcast. I actually started this podcast as a way to help my daughter learn about history in a fun and engaging way, and I think our hosts definitely do that. I have a passion for teaching kids, teens, and young adults about the past. There's something so powerful about understanding all these cultures and stories and myths and legends and historical events. I hold 2 college degrees, one in ancient history, one in religion, and I'm committed to making sure that every episode is rooted in solid, peer-reviewed, college-level research. It's important to me that we don't just tell stories, which, by the way, are fantastic, these myths, different cultures and legends and historical figures, but that we share the knowledge responsibly, and that it's both accurate and accessible to listeners of a young age, as well as teens and young adults. So I hope you enjoy the podcast. I hope you find it interesting. I hope you learn something. All right, let's get back to the show.
Alesia, a turning point in the Gallic Wars, and a perfect example of Caesar's strategic genius.
He's facing Vercingetorix, right? The leader who finally managed to unite the Gallic tribes against Rome.
Right. Vercingetorix was a formidable opponent, and he chose his battlefield well.
Alesia. It was a natural fortress.
Exactly. Alesia was this hilltop settlement, very easy to defend. Caesar knew a direct assault would be disastrous.
So he decided to besiege it.
A siege on a grand scale. Remember that bridge he built across the Rhine?
He went even bigger at Alesia.
Oh, much bigger. He ordered the construction of not 1, but 2 rings of fortifications around Alesia, miles of walls and trenches.
He basically built a fortress around their fortress.
Exactly. Caesar was determined to cut off Vercingetorix completely, starve him into submission.
But then a massive Gallic relief force showed up. Suddenly, Caesar's trapped between a rock and a hard place.
Talk about pressure. Outnumbered, surrounded. It was a real test for Caesar and his legions.
And once again, Caesar pulls off a victory.
A hard-fought victory. He used his legions brilliantly, taking full advantage of those fortifications he'd built. Plus, his personal leadership played a big role in keeping morale up.
Don't forget the Roman cavalry. They were crucial in that battle.
Absolutely. They harassed the relief force, disrupting their attacks, buying precious time for Caesar's legions.
In the end, Vercingetorix surrenders,
Marking the end of organized Gallic resistance against Rome.
It's amazing how this one battle connects back to those earlier events in Germania.
It shows how much Caesar had learned, how he'd grown more confident in his own abilities. He defied the Senate in Germania and emerged victorious. He'd learned to control the narrative, to use his victories to boost his own image back in Rome.
The image of Caesar as the hero, the savior of Rome.
Precisely, even as he was chipping away at the very foundations of the Republic.
It's amazing how this short campaign, this little blip in Germania, tells us so much about Caesar.
It reveals his ambition, his methods. It's like a crash course in Caesar's playbook.
He goes to Germania not to conquer, but to make a point, to show everyone who's in charge.
Exactly, to project an image of power. Rome's power, but also
his own power.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that image, it followed him right back to Rome.
Oh, I bet. The triumphant general, returning from yet another victory.
And he was smart about it. He used his victories, his writings about the campaigns. They all played into this idea of Caesar as the hero Rome needed.
The only one who could protect Rome, expand its borders.
Even if it meant bending the rules a little. Or a lot.
Exactly. And that's what makes this Germanic campaign so important. It's not just about those tribes across the Rhine. It's about Caesar testing the limits, amassing power.
Power that eventually put him on a collision course with the Senate.
Which, I mean, talk about a showdown. But before we get to all that, what about Germania itself? Caesar didn't stick around long, but he left his mark.
Oh, definitely. Imagine you're a Germanic tribesman. You see this Roman army, this bridge that seems to appear out of nowhere. You see their military might firsthand. That leaves a lasting impression.
A mix of awe and terror, probably.
For sure. It was a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Sign of things to come. Caesar may have left, but his actions sparked Rome's interest in the lands across the Rhine.
And that interest led to more conflict, more bloodshed.
Unfortunately, yes. Caesar's campaign was just the beginning, the first chapter in a long, bloody story.
Makes you wonder if Caesar, when he looked across that river, if he had any idea what he'd set in motion.
It's hard to say, but what we do know is that he was a man of incredible ambition, a brilliant strategist who knew how to get what he wanted.
And that's what makes him so fascinating to study, right? Caesar's Germanic campaign gives us a glimpse into the mind of a man who would change Rome forever.
A man of contradictions, a brilliant general, a ruthless leader. His story reminds us that history is never simple, and that even seemingly small events can have massive consequences.
Consequences that we're still grappling with today. Well, folks, that's Caesar's Germanic campaign, a story of ambition, power, and the clash of civilizations. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the 10-Minute Time Machine. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a like, comment, or share. Follow us on Spotify, YouTube, and social media for more.